I watched my grandmother die twice. Only one of them was real. I know that doesn't make any sense. Honestly, if someone else told me this story, I'd probably think they were making it up. But this happened when I was 15, and after that night, my family never spoke about it again. Every fall, we'd spend a weekend at the same cabin near the Cherokee National Forest. We'd been going there for years, so nothing about that trip felt unusual. Dinner had just ended. The adults were cleaning up. My cousins and I were getting ready to start a card game. My grandmother stood up and said she'd forgotten something on the front porch. She walked outside, maybe 30 seconds later. Someone knocked on the front door. 3 slow knocks. My uncle smiled and went to answer it, probably expecting one of the neighbors from another cabin. The second he opened the door, he froze. I remember thinking that was strange because my uncle wasn't the type to scare easily. I walked over to see what he was looking at. Standing on the porch was my grandmother. Same blue sweater, same gray braid, same little woven basket in her hand. She smiled at us like nothing was wrong. The problem was, my grandmother was standing behind me. I heard a glass bowl hit the kitchen floor and shatter. Nobody turned around. Nobody had to, because we'd all heard her voice. Quiet, shaking, almost like she didn't want whoever was outside to hear her. She said, "Don't let her in." For a few seconds, nobody in that cabin moved. The woman on the porch looked confused, then hurt. Like she couldn't understand why her own family wasn't inviting her inside. Finally, she smiled again and asked, "What's wrong? Why is everyone looking at me like that?" Everything about her was perfect. The voice, the smile, even the way she tilted her head. If I hadn't watched my grandmother walk out of the kitchen less than a minute earlier, I would have sworn that was her standing on the porch. I looked back at my grandmother inside the cabin. She wasn't looking at the woman's face. She was staring at the woman's hands. She grabbed my wrist so hard it actually hurt. Then she whispered something I'll never forget. "Whatever you do, don't look at her finger." Nobody moved. It couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 seconds, but it felt like forever. The woman outside was still smiling, not in a creepy way. If anything, she looked confused, like she genuinely didn't understand why nobody was opening the door. Then she took one slow step toward it. My grandmother practically shouted, "Lock it!" My uncle didn't hesitate. He slammed the door shut and threw the deadbolt across. The second the lock clicked, 3 more knocks. Slow, patient, almost polite. Nobody said a word. Then the woman spoke again. "You know it's me." It sounded exactly like my grandmother. Same voice, same little laugh at the end of her sentences. If I closed my eyes, I couldn't tell which one was outside. I remember looking over at my grandmother. She wasn't crying. She wasn't panicking. She just looked angry, nodded at us, at whatever was standing on the porch. She quietly told my mom to close every curtain in the cabin, every window, every blind. Then she finally looked at all of us. "I need every one of you to listen to me." She told us there was an old Cherokee story she'd hoped none of us would ever have to hear. It was about a woman called Spearfinger, an old spirit that didn't hunt by chasing people. She hunted by becoming someone you trusted. Sometimes she'd appear as an old traveler, sometimes a neighbor, sometimes someone you loved. The more she knew about you, the more convincing she became. Nobody interrupted her, because while she was talking, the woman outside started calling each of us by name. My uncle, my mom, my cousins, even me. She remembered things, little things, things no stranger should have known. She asked my cousin if his shoulder still hurt from falling out of a tree that summer. She reminded my mom about a recipe she'd burned the year before. Then she laughed and asked my uncle if he'd finally caught the big trout he'd been chasing all spring. Every memory was real. Every detail was perfect. The room started turning against itself. I could see it happening. My youngest cousin whispered, "What if that's actually Grandma?" Nobody answered him, because for a second, I think every one of us wondered the same thing. Then the knocking stopped. The silence somehow felt worse. My grandmother slowly walked toward one of the windows. She pulled the curtain back just enough to peek outside. The color drained from her face. She immediately let the curtain fall. I asked what she'd seen. She looked at me and quietly said, "She knows we recognize her now." I asked how. My grandmother took a slow breath. Then she said something that still gives me chills. "Because she isn't pretending anymore." I couldn't help myself. I looked toward the front door. At first, I didn't notice anything different. Then, I looked lower. The woman's blanket had shifted just enough for one hand to slip into the porch light. Every finger looked normal, except one. It was longer than the others, much longer, gray, smooth, almost like it had been carved from stone. That's when I understood why my grandmother had told me not to look. Nobody slept that night. The woman never tried to break the door down. She never screamed, and she never threatened us. She simply stayed on the porch. Every now and then she'd knock. Sometimes she'd softly call one of our names. Other times she'd just stand there, waiting. Just before sunrise, everything went quiet. No footsteps, no voice, nothing. My uncle was the first to step outside. The porch was empty. There were no footprints, no basket, no sign that anyone had ever been there. If it hadn't been for the broken bowl on the kitchen floor and the terrified look on every person's face, I probably would have convinced myself we'd all imagined it. On the drive home, my grandmother finally told us the rest of the story. She said the old Cherokee believed Spearfinger was clever because she understood people better than people understood themselves. She didn't force her way inside. She waited for someone to invite her, or trust her, or doubt the people they loved. That's how she won. Before she finished, I asked the question that had been bothering me all morning. How did she know all those things about us? My grandmother looked out the truck window for a long time before answering. Then she quietly said, "Because she's been watching." Nobody spoke for the rest of the drive. My grandmother passed away a few years later. Before she died, she made me promise something. She said if I ever had children, I'd tell them the story, not so they'd be afraid, so they'd know that not every danger announces itself. Some dangers smile, some dangers sound familiar, and some dangers look exactly like home. I've kept that promise. There's just one part of that night I've never been able to explain. A few months after my grandmother's funeral, my mom mailed me a box of old family photographs she'd found while cleaning out the attic. Most of them were exactly what you'd expect: birthdays, fishing trips, Christmas mornings. Then I found one I'd never seen before. It was taken on the porch of that same cabin years before I was born. My grandmother was standing there smiling at the camera. Behind her, just inside the tree line, stood another woman. She looked almost identical to my grandmother. Same braid, same build, same smile. Whoever took the picture either never noticed her or thought she belonged there. I turned the photo over. My grandfather had written the date in faded ink. Underneath it, he'd written 6 words. She came back. Don't tell the children. I still have that picture. I've never shown it to anyone. And every once in a while, I catch myself wondering something. Was that really the first time she came to our cabin? Or just the first time we recognized her? I never knew who the dear woman was. Then she said my name. I'm not someone who scares easily. I grew up hearing stories about things that lived in the dark. Spirits, warnings, things that watched from the tree line. My family kept those traditions alive, and I listened the way kids do when they don't really believe but don't want to say so out loud. I stopped thinking they were just stories about 11 years ago, on a back road, past midnight, when a woman I had never met looked at me across a dark truck cab and said my name. I was 16. 3 guys I ran with had spent the afternoon fishing at a lake outside town. We caught almost nothing, grabbed burgers on the way back, and started the drive home just before midnight. That road was the kind that makes you feel like you're the last people alive. Miles of forest and ranch land, no streetlights, no houses, just one long strip of highway disappearing into the dark. We'd been driving maybe 20 minutes when Tyler slowed down. There was a woman walking on the shoulder, not waving anyone down, not looking around for help, just walking, completely alone on a road that had no business having anyone on it at that hour, like she had nowhere better to be and nothing to be afraid of. Something about that immediately sat wrong with me. I told Tyler to pull over. Up close, she was striking in a way that's hard to explain. Not the kind of beautiful that makes you stare, the kind that made 4 loud, never quiet teenage boys go completely silent without any of us deciding to. She said her ride never came, asked if we'd drop her at a gas station about 20 minutes up the road. I said yes before anyone else could answer. She looked past all 3 of them and directly at me, just for a second, and I got the strangest feeling she had been waiting for me specifically to be the one who answered. She climbed in beside me. The door closed. Something shifted. Those 3 guys were incapable of silence. Tyler always had music going. Austin always had another joke. Noah couldn't last 30 seconds without saying something. But now there was nothing. Not uncomfortable silence, not tired silence. Something heavier, like the air inside the truck had quietly thickened around all of us. She watched the trees pass beneath the moonlight and smiled softly to herself every now and then, at nothing we could see. I kept thinking of perfectly normal things to say, simple questions anyone would ask. And every single time, the thought dissolved before it reached my mouth, quietly erased, like someone sitting just behind my thoughts, calmly removing them before I could use them. The only sound was the tires. Then she turned toward me, not Tyler, not Austin or Noah, me, and she said, "Hi, Jimmy." Every hair on my body stood up. Nobody had said my name, not once. I hadn't introduced myself, nobody had. I smiled back out of instinct. She tilted her head the way someone does when they've known you a long time, and asked if I'd been good. It wasn't the question that got me. It was how familiar it felt. Like I'd answered it before. Like she already knew what I was going to say. Without thinking, I told her I'd been trying. I still don't know why I said it that way. Her smile changed, went softer, almost proud. Then she turned back to the window, and I sat there with the feeling that I had just passed or failed something, and had no idea which one. Nobody spoke for the rest of the drive, not because we didn't want to, because none of us could. When the gas station appeared ahead, one pump, a small store, a single truck out front, she said it was perfect. Tyler pulled in. Nobody moved. She thanked us, reached for the door, and stepped out. I don't know why I looked down. I've turned that moment over for years and still can't explain it. Her dress shifted as she stepped onto the gravel, and instead of shoes, there were hooves, dark, polished, perfectly still, like they had always belonged there. My entire body forgot how to work. She closed the door without looking down, and then, without turning, without glancing back, she knew I'd seen them. She turned her head just far enough to meet my eyes through the window. She smiled, not threatening, not warning me, almost like she was saying good, the smallest nod, the kind you give someone you've known a long time. Then she turned the corner and was gone. When I got home, I told my mom 2 things: that a woman had known my name without being told, and that she'd asked if I'd been good. I have never seen color leave someone's face that fast. She locked every door, every window, every curtain. Then she called my grandmother. My grandmother arrived in 15 minutes. She didn't hug me. She looked me over slowly, like she was making sure every part of me was still there, and then asked me a series of questions I didn't understand. Had the woman touched me? Had she asked me to follow her? Had she asked me to leave the road? And then she asked if the woman had known my name. And then, before I had fully processed what was happening, she asked if she'd asked whether I'd been good. I asked how she knew that. What she told me next is the part I've carried ever since. When I was 5, my family was at a tribal gathering. I was playing with other kids. My mom looked away for maybe a minute. When she looked back, I was gone. They searched for 20 minutes. Family, strangers, everyone nearby. They were close to calling the police when someone found me. I wasn't crying. I wasn't scared. I was standing in a clearing just past the tree line, looking up at a woman, nodding slowly, the way a child does when they're listening to something important. The moment my mom called my name, the woman looked up, smiled, and walked into the trees. I looked at my mom like nothing had happened. When she asked what the woman had said to me, I told her, "It's our secret." And I never remembered it after that. Not one detail, not even a feeling, just blank. My grandmother told me there were many versions of the story: protector, avenger, a spirit that appears at crossroads, not to warn you, but to witness which direction you choose. My mom said quietly it might have something to do with my father. He was violent, always angry, gone by the time I was 5, and in prison not long after. I'd spent my whole life trying not to become that man. Grandma said she thought the dear woman knew that. She didn't think she came back for me exactly. She thought she came back to see what I'd become. That was over 20 years ago. I have a wife now, 2 kids, a life I didn't think I'd get to have. I've read every version of the story I could find. The more I read, the less afraid I became. But I've never been able to let go of one thing. I still don't know what she said to me in those woods when I was 5. I tell myself I was a kid. Kids forget. That's normal. But then I remember the way she looked at me through that window. The way she asked if I'd been good. Like she was picking up a conversation we'd started years before. And that's when the thought comes that scares me more than anything else about that night. Did I really forget? Or did she decide it wasn't time for me to remember yet? I have never been able to figure out which possibility frightens me more. That I lost the memory, or that she's still holding it. You guys ever have one of those things in your family that nobody will talk about? Not because it's embarrassing. They just won't. Every family's got something. For mine, it was the little people. I was probably 10 the first time I asked my grandpa about them. I don't even remember where I heard the name. It might have been from one of my cousins, or maybe one of my older uncles said it while everybody was outside cooking. I honestly don't remember. I just remember asking what they were. Now, if you knew my grandpa, you'd know he always had an answer for everything. Didn't matter if you asked him about hunting, fishing, old family stories, or something that happened 50 years ago. He loved telling stories. He was the kind of guy that could make a 20-minute drive feel like 5 because he'd always have something interesting to talk about. But that day, it was like somebody flipped a switch. I remember looking up at him, waiting for him to laugh or make up one of his stories, but he didn't. He just looked at me, not angry, not annoyed, just concerned. He looked over toward the trees behind the house for a second, then back at me. Finally, he said, "Where'd you hear that?" I shrugged. "I don't know. Somebody said it." He didn't answer right away. He just kind of nodded to himself like he was thinking about something. Then he said, "Don't ask people about that." That was it. No explanation, no story, nothing. And honestly, that bothered me way more than if he just made something up. Because my grandpa never shut down a conversation. Ever. A couple of weeks later, I asked him again. Same reaction, different day, different place. Same look on his face. This time, he didn't even answer. He just told me, "Leave those stories alone." I remember laughing because I thought he was messing with me. He wasn't. You can usually tell when somebody's trying to scare a kid for fun. This wasn't that. He genuinely didn't want me saying those words out loud. After that, I pretty much forgot about it. Life moved on. School, work, college. I only really thought about it again after my grandpa passed away. A few months later, I was helping my dad clean out his workshop behind the house. We'd been sorting through old fishing gear for a while when I remembered that conversation. I don't even know why it popped into my head. I just looked over at my dad and said, "Hey, why was Grandpa always so weird whenever somebody mentioned the little people?" The wrench in my dad's hand stopped moving. He didn't even look at me. He just quietly put it down on the workbench. For a long few seconds, all I could hear was the rain hitting the tin roof. Finally, he sighed. "I was hoping you'd never ask me that." I laughed. "What? They're just stories." He finally looked at me. "No, they're warnings." That was the first time I'd ever seen my dad look genuinely afraid. He told me every generation in our family had been told the same thing. Respect the woods. Don't whistle after dark. And if you ever think you hear children laughing where there shouldn't be children, you leave. You don't investigate. You don't answer. You don't call back. I asked him why. He just shook his head. Because sometimes they answer. He wouldn't say another word after that. At the time, I figured it was just another old family superstition. Looking back, I wish I'd listened. About a year later, a few friends and I planned a weekend camping trip. Nothing extreme, just one night out in the woods about an hour from home. It wasn't even a remote campground. There were marked trails, campsites, and a small fishing lake nearby. The kind of place families visit all the time. We spent the day hiking, grilling food, and sitting around the fire telling stories. Eventually, somebody started talking about local legends, Bigfoot, ghosts, old mines. Then, without even thinking, I brought up what my dad had told me. The little people. Nobody laughed. One of my friends actually looked at me and asked where I'd heard that. I told him my grandpa used to refuse to talk about them. His face changed immediately. He said his grandmother used to tell him the exact same thing. Then he got quiet. We changed the subject after that. Around midnight, we finally crawled into our tents. I don't know what time I woke up. There wasn't any reason. I was just suddenly awake. At first I thought somebody else in camp was moving around. Then I realized I was hearing footsteps, not heavy footsteps, small ones, walking through the leaves. They'd stop, then start again somewhere else, then stop. I remember smiling to myself because I figured it had to be raccoons. Until I heard laughing, children, very quiet, just beyond the trees. I froze. There weren't any families camping anywhere near us. The campground had been almost empty when we arrived. The laughing stopped. Then I heard something else. My name, softly, like somebody trying not to wake anyone else. I sat straight up. My first instinct was to answer. Then I remembered my dad. Don't answer. So I didn't. The voice called my name again, closer this time. I reached over and unzipped the tent just enough to look outside. The fire had burned down to glowing coals. Everything else was dark. Then I noticed something moving between the trees. At first I thought they were children, until one stepped into the moonlight. It couldn't have been more than 3 feet tall. Its body looked almost human, but something about the way it moved wasn't. Its arms were too long. Its head tilted just a little too far. It stood there watching my tent. Then another one appeared, then another. None of them crossed into our campsite. They just watched. One of them smiled. I don't know how else to explain it. It wasn't a friendly smile. It looked like it was waiting for me to do something. Anything. Answer, wave, step outside. Instead, I slowly zipped the tent shut. I don't think I slept another second that night. The sun couldn't come up fast enough. The second it did, I climbed out of my tent. Nobody else looked like they'd slept much either. Before I could even ask if anyone else had heard the voices, one of my friends beat me to it. Did somebody keep walking around camp last night? Another one nodded. I thought it was one of you. Then somebody asked the question that made my stomach turn. Who was laughing? Nobody answered, because nobody had been laughing. We packed up almost immediately. No breakfast, no fishing, no hiking, just packed the trucks and left. About 20 minutes down the road, we stopped at a diner. The waitress asked where we'd been camping. We told her. She got quiet. Then she asked one question. Did you hear anything? None of us answered right away. She smiled a little, not because she thought it was funny, because she'd already gotten her answer. She told us her grandfather grew up nearby. He always said there were places in those woods where you shouldn't answer if someone called your name, especially if it sounded like someone you knew. He believed there were old spirits, or little people, depending on who was telling the story, that liked to see who would follow them. Not everyone who followed disappeared, but enough people had that nobody in his family ever ignored the warning. I drove straight to my dad's house after that. Before I even said anything, he looked at me and asked, "You answered them?" I shook my head. No. He let out the longest sigh I've ever heard. Then he simply said, "Good." I asked him if Grandpa had ever seen them. He looked out the kitchen window for a long time before answering. I don't know if he saw them, but something saw him. That was the end of the conversation. He never brought it up again. Neither did I. Until now. I still camp. I still hunt. I still spend more time in the woods than most people. But there are a few rules I never break anymore. If the woods suddenly go quiet, I leave. If I hear children where there shouldn't be any, I leave. And if somebody calls my name from somewhere I can't see, I keep walking. Because after all these years, I still don't know what would have happened if I'd answered. And honestly, I don't think I want to find out.